Hello everyone, I'm Bruffy1322 and this video will showcase the fastest cars in the GTA 5 Sport class, organised first of all by race tier and then by lap time within each tier, with the top speed of each vehicle also shown in order to identify any outliers. All 109 sports cars have been put through their paces on my testing track and top speed run, and we'll be going from the slowest O tier cars to the top S tier in this video. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on future testing of new vehicles added to GTA 5 and beyond, and check out all other classes in the playlist. This video is supported by my wonderful patrons on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/Bruffy1322 to directly support this work and find out all the perks you can get by doing so, including early car testing info and early access to these testing videos. As we see the vehicles in the sports class that aren't usable in regular races, it's important for me to let you know that the intro video to this series, which is linked in the description and pinned comment, likely answers any questions you have about this testing. From simple things like what car upgrades are needed to maximise performance and what HSW stands for, to more complicated things like why I use off-road wheels and overall testing methodologies. Give that video a watch if there's anything you don't understand here, since everything there is assumed knowledge for this video. When it comes to the non-raceable vehicles, the Vito karts obviously are usable in their own go-kart races, but they're classified as non-raceable here as they can't be used in sports class races despite being in the sports class. The ZR380 can do some weird things with the shunt boost, but I'm not covering that here. This is its normal lap time with the nitrous boost, and the Armoured Paragon is just a fraction slower than the normal version. And so here we are, the sports class. It's always been the biggest class in the game, but back in 2013 it only needed 19 cars to have that achievement. When I last did a full class testing video for sports, there was 72 cars. Now it's 109. Putting this video together has taken me ages, not just for the testing but all the editing and data entry for 109 lap times, top speeds, car names. The scale is staggering. We'll see 15 tiers in this video, starting all the way down in the O tier with the two blister compacts, which are identical and still a travesty that they're not in the compacts class. Now the N tier is the first interesting one with 4 cars, with the Strider and the Penumbra at the start of the tier being the more consistent choices over a race, even though they are sort of a little bit off the pace for ultimate lap time. But when you see the top 2 for the tier of the Futo and the Raptor, you realise that sometimes taking a more consistent Penumbra or a Strider might actually be a better option. The Futo and the Raptor will give the best lap times depending on the track, with the Futo having the higher top speed, whereas the Raptor has a pretty bad top speed but doesn't have a decent amount of grip. But they are both very difficult to drive vehicles and difficult to manage across a race distance, especially the Raptor and the way that it, handles bumps and curbs and all that kind of stuff. So it's the first interesting tier N. The same can't really be said for tier M and L because they both just consist of 2 cars that are relatively well balanced with each other depending on the track, but also wouldn't really fit anywhere else. So we're flying through the tiers first, at the start of this list. The Schwarzer is actually one of the first cars I retested back in February 2023 when I started this whole journey of retesting all the cars on the new gen platforms. And I started with sports because I figured if I could do this mammoth class, I could do anything. 1 year later basically, and here we are with this video. So with the L tier, the Schafter LWB is first up. It's only a fraction slower than the Sugoi, which we're going to see next, but ultimately I would say the Sugoi is probably the one you're going to want to choose more often than not because it does have a higher top speed. But again, we're just flying through these tiers initially with some relatively slow vehicles for the class, but those that wouldn't really fit anywhere else. It's with the K tier that we start to see something more proper in terms of what we used to for more competitive tiers of cars, because even down here we've got 10 cars in the K tier and they're all separated by 7/10 of a second. And that kind of sets the tone really for how close some of these tiers are, just as a natural consequence of having over 100 cars in the class overall. When it comes to the K tier, the Buffalo is, I would say, a spice pick for the tier. Most of the time it's probably not going to be on the pace, but you can use it if you want to give yourself a small handicap without going into a different tier entirely, and it would obviously be way too quick for the previous tier anyway. Then we've got a classic with the Fusillade, and then the Ruston, the Furora GT, one of the very early GTA DLC cars from back in the day, and notably doesn't have a spoiler upgrade, so you don't get any extra grip from that. a 107 lap time that we're seeing from the K tier is actually relatively impressive for cars in the game overall. You know, I think 107 to 105 is kind of what, you know, mid sports car level of lap time, and it's relatively quick. If you had one of these cars in the game, you would think, hey, yeah, that's a pretty decent performer, even though they're down in sort of 88th for the sports class. The Chameleon here is actually the slowest vehicle for top speed in the entire class, only just breaking 100 miles per hour. So yeah, we've finally seen the Blister Compact was obviously the slowest for lap time in 103rd place, and then the Chameleon is the slowest for top speed. And then towards the top of the K tier, we've got the Buffalo S, which is, you know, a little bit quicker than the regular Buffalo for both lap time and top speed. The two Rapid GTs, which are a little bit more difficult to manage than the Buffalo in terms of the way that they handle in the cornering and stuff like that, but they have a really decent top speed. You know, the Rapid GTs are kind of certainly up there, like you can see, with 44th place in the sports class for top speed. That's pretty impressive showing, even though they're quite far down for lap time. And finally the Drift Tampa, which is a really nice car to drive, but obviously lacks a little bit with top speed, so it'll be dependent on the track type as to whether that's competitive with the others. Now the J tier is kind of like the race cars class, with 8 cars, most of which have some sort of racing pedigree, or at least some racing liveries, like our first 2 vehicles with the ZR350 and the Sprunk Buffalo. But the rest of the cars in this tier are all, you know, actual, what you would consider to be race cars of different types in real life as well. Although I suppose you could say the same for the Sprunk Buffalo. But first up, we got all of the hot rings together in this tier. The hot ring Everon is the slowest for lap time. Only just though, as you'll notice, the lap times in this tier are very close. But it does have the highest top speed of all the hot ring vehicles, so interesting balance there. Then we've got the GB200, which again, it's a little bit lower on the top speed front, but a decent lap time of 106.4, and this is where we get into the rally subclass, if you like, you know, with the GB200, the Omnis. We're going to see a few others in the next tier as well. 106.399 for the Omnis, again sort of held back by the top speed like the GB200, but a lovely car to drive. And then we've got another 2 hot ring vehicles, with the hot ring Sabre in the middle with a 106.3, 122.5 mile per hour lap top speed is a little bit slower than what we saw from the hot ring Everon. And then finally the hot ring Hellfire with its weird brake to get more grip flap on the top. It's got a, you know, a relatively decent top speed, but and its lap time is the best of the 3, but that's very specific and dependent on how much you can brake to get that extra traction, because it's really weird with that. And finally for the J tier, we've got the Kuruma, again another rally sort of style car that's held back by its top speed, but it gets a good lap time and got some good acceleration. We've got another 8 cars for the I tier, starting with the Comet Safari, which is only a fraction quicker than the Kuruma for lap time, but it has a much higher top speed, and it also loves the bumps and gets a lot of boost from that, so it's worth bumping up a tier and not leaving it to be dominant in the previous one. The Panther has a decent top speed here, even though it's sort of towards the back end of the tier in terms of lap time, although again, all of these tiers are very close. The lap time differences between all of these cars are, you know, very small. But that's sort of what we're going to see from the tiers during this video, is that towards the bottom end of the tier, we've got cars that have higher top speeds, but a little bit, you know, lower on the lap time front, and that just works into the balance of how these tiers are produced, that it's better to have a car that has a higher top speed at the bottom of a tier, and then it can be competitive in certain situations, rather than being at the top of another tier for lap time and then it also has a really high top speed to just dominate everything. Another vehicle that we often see for rally races is the Tropos Rally. It's the quickest one so far, and probably the best all-rounder for most people for those restricted sports class rally races, assuming that much faster rally cars like the AC Sport and the Flash GT aren't available, which they're normally banned because they're too quick. And then rounding off the I tier, we've got the Sterling GT, which is usable in sports races, despite it being in the Sports Classics class, and it's also usable in Sports Classic races as well, so it gives us an extra vehicle to use for sports races. Finally, we've got the Remus at the top of the I tier. Lacks a little bit with the top speed, same as the Sterling GT. Like I was saying, that generally the better lap time vehicles in each tier will suffer a bit for top speed. So the H and G tiers both have 7 cars each, with some absolute classics in the H tier especially, and all are only separated by half a second of lap time across all 7 cars, starting with the Coquette with a 105.4, decent enough top speed of a straight 120 mph, and then the Alpha, which was one of the first DLC vehicles in the game, and just this tier is just full of sort of 2013, 2014 cars, with the Carbonizère following it up here. 66th place in the sports class for the Carbonizère. We're getting closer to the middle of all of them, but yeah, again, another 120 mph, same as the Coquette. So these sort of old style sports cars do usually perform very similarly, and then the S95 is actually a newer breed of car. You know, it's only available on PS5 and the series consoles, but it's slotting in very nicely in terms of pace with all of these old style sports cars, so it's kind of, you know, programmed in the same way in a way. The Banshee, classic vehicle, 105.1, 64th place in the sports class, and then the Sultan follows it up. Again, these classic 2013 vehicles, all very close on pace. The top speeds give them a relative balance to all be in the H tier. And then we've got the pretty not very nice to drive Locust, and that's saying it nicely, is the top of the H tier, but you're probably better off with any of the others, at least if you're on a bumpy track, but it is about on the pace of the others. Alright, now it's time for the G tier, and it's quite an eclectic mix of cars in this tier, all separated by half a second, and there's 9 of them, so again, very very close from top to bottom in terms of their lap times. Starting with the Sentinel Classic with the 104.7, we're up to 61st in the sports class, so we're still not halfway through yet, but we're almost there. And then followed up by 2 Comets with the Comet S2, which is one of the better top speeds of vehicles in this tier. And then the Comet Retro Custom just after it, which has some relatively unique driving characteristics, and especially in comparison to other vehicles for the tier, it's a little bit of a challenging one to drive, but when you hook it up nicely, it can give you a good lap time and a good experience. The best top speed vehicle for the tier though is the Shafter V12 with a really good top speed of 126 miles per hour. So it's, you know, again, if you're going to do a really high top speed circuit that was only restricted to the G tier, this is what you'd choose. But the Falira is probably the best all-rounder for most tracks for this tier, just because it's one of the nicer ones to drive, and it's got a good balance of lap time, grip and top speed. It's an eclectic mix in the G tier with, you know, cars that have very high top speeds like the Shafter V12, very low top speeds as well with the Omnis EGT that we're about to see, and, you know, cars that are in the middle but have some unique driving characteristics like the Comet Retro Custom. It's a really interesting mix in this tier, and to have 9 cars all separated by such a small amount of lap time but have such different characteristics, it makes it a really interesting one. Now, the Serrano at the very top of the tier is another old car that is, again, a good performer overall, an all-rounder with the Falira, and the Cypher tops the tier really because it's a nice driving experience, but it struggles for that top speed with 113.5. It's pretty weak for top speed, so that's where that balance comes in. Alright, now it's time to really see the heart of the sports class, with both the F and the E tiers having 16 cars each in both of them. It's crazy. If you combine them both, you've got 32 cars separated by only around 1.5 seconds of lap time. This really is the heart of the sports class. The F tier starts with 2 cars that actually get worse lap times than the Cypher in the G tier, but they have huge top speeds, as you've seen, which warrants putting them here into the higher tier, because otherwise they would be dominant in G, and now certain tracks will make them possible to use for F tier races because of those high top speeds. Then we've got sort of what I would consider to be what should be the sedans class. Obviously we just saw the Shafter V12 in the previous tier, but then we've also got the Komoda not too far ahead, the Revolta here, and the VSTR, all very close in terms of lap time all together, and all basically sedans. And if they were put in the sedans class, they would be right on the pace of the top sedans as well. It would be an incredible class, the sedans class, if we had these vehicles, the Komoda, the VSTR, the Revolta, the Shafter V12 is obviously usable there as well, and the Reinhardt and the Cinque Mille that are already at the top of the sedans class. It would be a great class, and it's a shame that they were just, you know, shoved into sports, but that is the case with a lot of vehicles, you know, they just get shoved into sports and are relatively irrelevant in a way over the course of, you know, the whole class. At least we've got the tiers now to bring relevancy to them. The Flash GT, not a very good car, horrible, has all the worst kind of advanced handling flags, terrible on the bumps, and really slows down on every single bump that you hit. Not very nice to handle. In comparison to the Spectre and the Spectre Custom, which are very nice to handle, very close in terms of pace and performance. The Spectre Custom gets downforce actually, whereas the regular Spectre only gets the benefit of a regular spoiler, but they're pretty well balanced to be pretty much exactly the same performance. And then the Euros here just after it gets a really impressive lap time, to be honest, of a 104.0. Its top speed does let it down a little bit, but it does very well, especially considering it's a tuner vehicle. It's not on the top pace of the tuners, but it's not too far away, and right in the middle of the F tier alongside the Bestia GTS. We've got some incredibly close lap times here. If you've been noticing, 1 minute 4.0 is a very common lap time that we're seeing from a lot of these cars, just 0.430, 0.435, 0.31. It's crazy how close they all are. The Jester RR just ahead of the Bestia GTS with a really impressive top speed that really helps it out, and the same is true for the 770 here. Again, another decent top speed with it also stretches its legs a little bit in terms of lap time, being 0.2 of a second quicker, but again still relatively well balanced across the entire F tier. And again, different tracks and different circumstances will give different results in terms of which car is the best to take for, you know, all of these cars. 300R, again, a nice car to drive, lacks a little bit on the top speed side in comparison to some of the higher top speed stuff in the tier. The Comet, again, just ahead, has a better lap time, and again a sort of middling top speed. Quite a difficult car to maximize the Comet, I would say, in comparison to the Penumbra FF, which is really nice to drive around the corners but really lacks on that top speed front. So really good grip, and the more cornering and high traction zones a track has, the better that will do. And the more acceleration zones a track has, the better the riding will do, because obviously with it being an electric vehicle, it's got great acceleration from a slow speed, but really lacks in terms of that top speed. So incredible tier, 16 cars with the F tier, and we're going to have another 16 cars with the E tier. Starting with the Coquette D10, which again, just like at the start of the previous tier, it has a worse lap time than the top few cars from F, but because of that incredibly high top speed of 130 miles per hour, it's worth putting it up a tier, because it's going to be more competitive here than it would be. You know, it would be dominant, or mostly dominant, in the previous tier, in tier F. So the Schlagen GT, very smooth and nice car to drive, with a decent top speed, but it's sort of towards the bottom end of the tier in terms of lap time. The same can be said for the Massacro and the Massacro race car, which are basically identical. The Massacro race car has the tiniest little bit of extra traction, but ultimately they're both the same. And again, 16 cars in this tier, all separated by a very small amount of lap time with different characteristics to them. These two tiers, tier E and tier F, just give some incredible races, and I think the E tier for sports cars is probably the single best tier of any tier of car and class in the entire game. You can take any of 16 of these classic, great, nice to drive vehicles and be able to be competitive on a balanced track with any of them, and that's just fantastic to see. And that is a natural consequence of having 100 cars in the class. You're going to get a lot of cars that end up just being on the same pace just by, you know, how their characteristics are. The Neon is obviously great in terms of the acceleration, but lacks in terms of top speed. And then the middle of the E tier, we've got all the Fs, and it's quite amazing how close they all are actually. Where, you know, which one is best out of these will be entirely determined by the track type. The 9Fs like a more bumpy city circuit and tighter corners, while the 8Fs lack of top speed holds it back on smoother tracks with longer straights, but its better grip in the corners means it will do well on traction oriented circuits. And then the 10F that we just saw has a big top speed but struggles with consistency and cornering ability, so it's best reserved for more top speed oriented tracks. And ultimately, on a more balanced track like my testing circuit, they're all very close together. The 9F, the 9F Cabrio, which are basically identical, and the 8F and the 10F They're all super close, and like I said, it's going to be track and driver preference dependent as to which one is ultimately the best in any given situation, although that is obviously also the case for the majority of cars in this class because the tiers are so close and competitive. Towards the top of the E tier, we've got 5 cars separated by less than 1/10 of a second, with the legendary and lovely to drive Jester and Feltzer mixing it in with the top cars from the Tuners subclass, of which the Growler is one. The top 2 from this tier are the top 2 Tuners, and they're a couple of tenths ahead, but this sort of just off the top with the Jester, the Feltzer, the Growler, we're seeing 102.9 lap times from all of them. The Calico's another one that's in this sort of area, and it's crazy how close they all are. They're all within 1/10, and such different characteristics as well, with the Calico being more, acceleration based and having crazy understeer, the Feltzer being smooth and all grip orientated but not particularly great in terms of raw acceleration. But yeah, the top 2 in this tier are the top 2 in the Tuners subclass, and they do have a little bit of an advantage on the rest with a couple of tenths of a second, but also have relatively lackluster top speeds in comparison to the cars that we've seen throughout the rest of the E tier. So again, that's where that balance comes in to the top of the tier, that even though these are probably the best to use for most races, they will have some deficiencies in terms of top speed and tracks where that is more of an important factor, and these are obviously the top vehicles for the Tuners subclass as well. Okay, the D tier, and compared to what we've just seen with 16 cars in each of the previous 2 tiers, this is actually quite small. The Italy GTO Stinger TT with that crazy top speed, it does push it up into the D tier when its lap time might suggest that it should be in the previous tier. Again, that high top speed will make it competitive in some races in this tier depending on the track type. And then the 10F wide body with a 102.5, 128 mph top speed. Again, the top speed is really helping some of these cars at the bottom of the tier to push themselves and be competitive. The Jester race car is probably the best all-rounder for this tier with a 102.3, decent enough top speed, but also loves the bumps and the boosts of the curbs in the city, so it's a good one to pick in those kind of situations. And the old king of the Elegy RH8 is still up here in 17th place for the sports class with a 102.2, lacks a little bit for top speed, but yeah, it's nice to see the Elegy is still there or thereabouts in the top 20 for the class. And finally, finishing off the D tier, like I said, it's a small one, is the Sultan Classic. Again, struggles a bit with top speed. The top speed's getting worse as the lap time's getting improved in this tier, but it provides a good balance of cars. We're into the top 15 cars for the class now with the C tier, which provides an interesting mix of cars, with some having a lot of grip, like the Issy Sport here and the Comet SR that we're going to see shortly. We've got cars with lots of top speed, like with the Corsita that we're going to see shortly as well. Cars with lots of acceleration, like with the Amorgon. We've got cars with a more balanced and pleasant to drive experience with the Jugular and the Paragon R. And also cars with a more balanced but less than pleasant driving experience with the Neo. So the C tier is interesting because even though the lap times don't seem as close up here as what we've seen from some of the other tiers from car to car, they've all got such different characteristics in terms of these cars, like lots of grip, lots of top speed, lots of acceleration, that ultimately they all come together, and different tracks will make different cars be the ones to pick. The Jugular, like I said, and the Paragon are probably the best all-round consistent driving experiences, just because they're relatively nice to drive, and a lot of the other cars here, they might struggle on a certain track type, or they might be difficult to maximize, whereas the Jugular and the Paragon are always going to be competitive and decent experiences to drive. The Amorgon actually has the biggest discrepancy between lap time and top speed position of any car in any class, with a difference of 88 positions. No other car even comes close to this, such as its level of grip and acceleration in comparison to its really poor straight line performance. The Amorgon is the 10th best for lap time and the 6th worst in the class for top speed. And the Neo is ultimately the best lap time in this tier, but it's a difficult one to manage with the advanced handling flag, so use it with caution. Alright, B tier time now. We're really getting up there in terms of the positions, starting with the Italia RSX, which is in the top 10. We're into the top 10 now. There's only 8 cars remaining. 8th for lap time, 6th for top speed for the Italia RSX. It's that top speed that allows it to compete with other cars in this class depending on the track. But then we've got the regular La Carousse just ahead of it, whose top speed won't allow it to compete depending on the track. Its incredible grip will, but that 82nd place for top speed really does let it down. But the final 3 cars in the B tier are only separated by 0.5 of a second for lap time and contain 2 classics made relevant by HSW upgrades and one that dominated when it released. First up is the HSW Banshee, where, just like with other HSW cars, the massive top speed takes it up 6 tiers from its original spot. Remember that House Special Works modifications are only available on PS5 and Xbox Series X consoles, so just discount them from this list if you're not on those platforms. Top 5 is always possible for the Pariah next, which remains the fastest non-HSW sports car for top speed in the class. It's also the only car in the entire class to have the exact same position for lap time and top speed, and is a fraction quicker than the Banshee for lap time due to its better grip and overall balanced performance. An even bigger glow up now though, as the Sterling GT moves up 7 tiers from I for the base car to B for the HSW upgraded version. The monster top speed with smooth and enjoyable handling makes it a great choice for this tier, although the Pariah is arguably still the best all-rounder. Now only 4 cars in the entire class break the 1 minute barrier, starting with the HSW version of the S95, which goes more than 1 second per lap quicker than the cars we just saw. The HSW S95 is basically like having the grip of the Pariah with the top speed of the Sterling GT. You put 2 B tier cars together and you get an A tier car. There's no need for any of that though with the Italia GTO, because that's just raw power if you can handle it. It's just a regular vehicle, and while it lacks a bit of top speed under normal circumstances, it really gains from the bumps and remains the fastest non-HSW sports car in the game for lap time. Next up is the HSW Stinger TT, which is pretty inconsistent and has even more floaty handling than a Regina. You'll point the car in one direction and wait seemingly an age for it to actually turn. It's not very responsive at all, so while its top speed is easily the fastest in the entire game for a car, racing with it is a more difficult prospect, and there's no point having all that top speed if you can't take the corners like our number 1 car for the class, which is also our only S tier car, the HSW La Carousse. And it's a full 3 seconds per lap quicker than anything else in the class. 3 seconds. We've seen 32 cars separated by 1.5 seconds during the course of this video, and then the La Carousse casually goes double that quicker than even second place. A 56 second lap time is astonishing, and only 2 HSW supercars and the open wheelers go around the track quicker when talking about cars. This is what happens when you actually give a high top speed to a B tier grip monster, and if HSW is turned on, there's going to be very few tracks where it isn't the best option. If HSW is turned off, of course, the Italia GTO is your best bet, with the Pariah and Italia RSX being the easier to drive options if you start having trouble. While HSW being part of the equation makes for some really interesting tiers up at the top of the sports class with multiple options, it also kind of creates one of the most dominant sports cars we've ever seen, and that 56 second lap time being 3 full seconds quicker than the rest of the cars in the class. It's incredible. And there we go, that's the sports class. 109 cars we've seen in this video. That's the 103 raceable sports cars, the 2 sports classic cars with the Sterling GT and HSW version that are usable in sports races, and the 4 non-raceable sports cars as well. The scale of this class is just staggering. It's crazy how, it's always been the biggest, but we've gone from 19 cars in 2013 to 109 now, just because the sports class seemingly gets everything, whether it's a sedan or a muscle car or an SUV. Sometimes they'll just be put in sports, and that is why there's so many cars here now. But one, positive of that is that it gives us really interesting and close tiers where there's a lot of cars with, close lap times, and the fact that we've got 2 tiers with tiers F and E that have 16 cars in them each, which is only 3 less than the entire sports class was at launch, is quite remarkable. So yeah, a lot of good racing to be had with some of the vehicles from here, as long as you restrict your racing to set tiers. If you don't, it's basically just either an Italy GTO or a HSW La Carouse is the only option for most racers. Putting this video together has been quite an accomplishment. I'm really proud of myself for doing all of this. The sheer number of cars in this tier is just crazy, and you know, with all the different bits of footage for all of those 109 cars, all the different text labels that's required and to be edited for all of it, it's been quite a journey putting this one together. So hopefully you've all enjoyed, hopefully it's been useful to you. We're going to be doing the muscle class next, and then sports classics, and then continue with all of them, but this is the big one, and this one is done now, so we can look forward, thankfully, and we know that we've got the hardest work gone and out of our way. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for all the support. Thanks to everybody on Patreon and YouTube members who got to see this video a little bit early this time, and check those out if you do want to support my work and what I'm doing here. Thank you all so much for the support, as always. Also, remember to read the description for more info, comment with your thoughts, like the video if you enjoyed it, found it helpful, and subscribe for more. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.